and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Normally on the channel we've done a lot of prediction videos, EFL Cup, Premier League, but today we're going to make something a little bit different with a current European top 10 power rankings, right? Before I get into the top 10, first I want to talk about some honorable mentions. Now, our first honorable mention is Napoli. Napoli currently sit first place in the Serie A, right? And they have the least goals scored against them. The reason I put them this low is because they're not currently competing in the Champions League, and in Serie A, they haven't been winning games dominantly. They've been winning most of their games 1-0. That just shows you how difficult it is to get onto this list, how competitive these teams are. Now, the other team I want to mention is PSG. PSG is first in Ligue 1, right? And they've already won a trophy. They've just been an utterly dominant side in Ligue 1. But in the Champions League, they haven't performed very well. They've only won 2 games, and they weren't massive games. Now, I think this makes PSG a team to watch in the Champions League because they have a lot to prove, but I can't justify putting them higher than this. Now, time for our top 10. Now, our number 10 is Newcastle sit 10th place, right? Now, this kind of goes against my argument with Napoli. They don't play in the Champions League, but in the Premier League, they have done some incredible things. They had a rough start to the season, but they currently sit 5th place, right? They are on a 7-game winning streak, and in those 7 games, they've scored 17 goals, right? They're in the EFL Cup semi-final, and they just beat Arsenal in the first leg. I think that this team just has a lot to show. They have a lot of firepower. They have some world-class players, and I think this team has the opportunity to push for top 4 and to get right back into the Champions League. In 9th place, I had Atalanta. Originally, I had Atalanta higher, right, because they're performing better in the Champions League, but this is still a really good side. They play beautiful football, right? They're tied for first in Serie A if they win their game at hand. They have the second most goals scored with 43 and a goal difference of 23. They currently sit 13th in the Champions League, right? They've had a little bit of a rough patch recently. They haven't been winning games as dominantly, right? And they just lost to Real Madrid recently, dropping them down a little bit in the Champions League. No shame losing to Real Madrid. Ultimately, Atalanta is a good side, and I would watch out for this team. In 8th place, this one is going to be a little bit of controversial. I just want to say really fast before we get into this 8th place side that 8th through 6th, you can interchange them. This right now is just my personal thought process, my personal preference. But in 8th place, I have Barcelona. Barcelona started out as one of the best sides in all of Europe. I thought they were going to push to win everything, but they've kind of had a recent drop-off with an injury to Lamine Yamal. Turns out he was the glue to the side, but they do have other world-class, really good players in Rafinha and Lewandowski, Pedri, Gavi, Dani Olmo, right? But they currently sit 3rd in La Liga. They've dropped a lot of points in the past month and a half, but they're still competing for the title, right? They sit 3rd in La Liga, but also 2nd in the Champions League, right? So they're pretty much already through there. I think this team has a lot to show us in these next coming up months, and they could still win La Liga, and they could definitely win the Champions League. They have the most goals scored in La Liga with 51, so this is a dominant attacking side. In 7th place, I have Real Madrid. Right, this is going to be a little bit controversial that they're not higher, but this is where I've got them. They currently sit 1st place in La Liga, right? Although another team we're going to talk about later has a chance to pass them really soon. Right, they sit 20th place in the Champions League. They've had a little bit of struggles there, but they look to be kind of starting to gel together, picking up their form. The players are starting to click a little bit, right, and they're starting to score more goals. Now, one thing I want to talk about with Real Madrid is they always tend to play not the most beautiful, right, but they get the results. And I think that's the big deal with Real Madrid. They're not going to play beautifully, but they're going to get results. And they're starting to show that more and more as the season goes on. This team still could win the Champions League regardless of the position they have right now. I would watch out for this team. In 6th place, I have Bayern Munich, right? They currently sit first place in the Bundesliga and 10th in the Champions League. In the Bundesliga, they've been dominant, right? They've been winning so many games. They've been scoring so many goals. In fact, they have the most goals scored with 47 and the least goals scored against them with 13, right? It's hard to deny them a spot in this top 10. They almost broke into the top 5, right? Just recently being knocked out of the DFB Pokal kind of knocked them off that perch a little bit. And the fact that they're not higher in the Champions League also kind of damages their reputation a little bit. But this is still a really good German side. Fifth place, I have Bayer Leverkusen. Now this one I think could be a little bit controversial. They currently sit second place in the Bundesliga, right? But they've been picking up results. They had a rocky start to the season, but they've been winning games recently. In the Champions League, they sit fourth place, which is impressive. They play beautiful football for most of the time, and they look to be on their way up, right? They have the second most goals scored in the Bundesliga with 40, and they've beaten both Dortmund and they've just knocked out Bayern Munich out of the DFB Pokal, which was a crazy game. I think that this side can challenge for a lot of things. I think they can go for a double in the Bundesliga, which would be crazy. Beating up Bayern Munich to another title is insane. They're not quite as good as they were last season, but this is still a side to watch out for. Fourth place could be controversial, but I have Arsenal. Right, I had them a little bit higher up a few weeks ago, but they've run into a rough patch with Saka being injured, looking to have been the kind of keystone, the heart of Arsenal. But don't get it twisted, this is still a good side. They still have some quality players. The defense is arguably one of the best in all of Europe. In the Premier League, they have only 18 goals scored against them, which is the least goals scored, and they're joint third place with Chelsea for the most goals scored with 39, right? They currently sit second in the Prem, tied with Nottingham Forest, and they're third place in the Champions League. This is a side that is still competing for trophies. They're still in the FA Cup. They're still in the Champions League. They can still compete for the Premier League. Although in the EFL Cup, it's looking a little bit difficult after a loss to Newcastle. But again, Arsenal, still a strong side. I think you guys are going to call me crazy for this third place pick, but I have Atletico Madrid. Now, Atletico Madrid is in second place in La Liga, but they have a game in hand. They win that game in hand, they shoot up, I think, to first place. Now, what makes this team so good is how rock solid their defense has been. They've only had 12 goals scored against them, right? They haven't been scoring a lot, but the offense has started to pick up, and they're starting to score more. With the recent win against Barcelona, they have solidified themselves as a title contending side in La Liga. In the Champions League, they sit 11th, and it's hard to imagine them not progressing to the round of 16. I think that this is a really good team. I personally love an underdog story. To see them competing really, really, really makes me happy. In second place, I have Inter Milan. Inter Milan is an interesting side. They currently sit third in Serie A, but they have 2 games in hand, right? They win both of those, they shoot up to first place. They have been a dominant side. They've been winning games convincingly. They've been playing good football, pretty similar to Atalanta. I just think that Inter Milan has more quality players than Atalanta. The other big thing is they have the most goals scored in Serie A with 45 goals, and the second least goals scored against them in Serie A with 15. Right? They sit 6th in the Champions League, and they've only lost 1 game, and that was to Bayer Leverkusen, which put off a masterclass performance. They were the better side, but it still was a very back and forth match. Right? Didn't know who was going to win. Inter Milan has a pretty solid defense. They look to be a really good side. And let's be honest, they can challenge for that Champions League title. I don't think there's any one team that's looking to run away with it. And so I think this side can be very competitive this season. First place, I have Liverpool. let's be honest, we all expected this when you clicked onto the video. Liverpool, first in the Premier League, first in the Champions League. They are a dominant side in all of Europe, right? They've only had 19 goals scored against them in the Prem, and they've scored 47 goals in the Prem, which is the most in all of the Prem. They have some world-class players in Van Dijk and Mo Salah. Ultimately, how much more do I need to say? I've talked about them a lot in the Prem predictions. This is a really good side. They have hit a little bit of a rough patch, so we'll have to see where they sit next month. Anyway, those are my top 10 sides in all of Europe, my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, and what you think I should do in future videos. Anyway, I will see you in the next video.